I gave my grieving daughter a shop to heal, but her mother-in-law turned her into an unpaid slave. They thought a retired auditor was harmless, until I started tracking the 47 and $300 they stole from her future. Before continuing, write where you are from or what time it is. The heavy scent of lilies used to mean peace, but as I stepped into Vivian's blooms that Thursday afternoon, it smelled like a trap. I gave my daughter this shop so she could recover after her husband's death. I wanted to give her a purpose and a fresh start. Instead, I found a blonde woman in an expensive cream blazer sitting behind the counter, her French manicured nails tapping impatiently on her phone screen. She didn't look up when the bell chimed. The air in the room felt thin and wrong. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone suggesting she'd rather be anywhere else. "I need arrangements for the Pearl District charity auction," I said, watching her eyes for a flicker of recognition. "It's about $2,300 worth of work. Where's Vivian?" The woman straightened her blazer, reassessing me. I was wearing a polo shirt and running shoes, clearly not her idea of a high-end client. "I'm the manager here, Effie Quinn. Vivian is occupied with other duties. I can help you." "Manager?" My heart hammered against my ribs. I had signed the deed over to my daughter 8 months ago, right after Brandon died in that December accident. She was the owner. "I'd prefer to speak with Vivian," I told her. "It's detailed." "As I said, I'm perfectly capable," Effie snapped. "Dad!" The voice was a whisper from the back room. Effie's jaw tightened as she called out, "Vivian, a customer for you." My daughter emerged, and my chest constricted. She had always been slender, but now she looked gaunt, her bones visible through her thin wrists. Dark circles shadowed her red-rimmed eyes, and her hair was yanked back in a messy ponytail. She was wearing a stained apron and faded clothes, her hands stained green from flower stems. "Hi, I didn't know you were coming," she said, but she wouldn't meet my eyes. This wasn't grief. I had seen her grieving Brandon. This was pure, unadulterated fear. She flinched when Effie shifted her position near the counter. I looked down and saw a dark bruise on Vivian's left wrist, purple and yellow against her pale skin. She saw me notice and jerked her arm back, hiding it behind the apron. "Actually, I will handle the financial aspects," Effie interrupted, stepping between us. "Vivian, shouldn't you finish those rose stems? The Hartley wedding ships by 3. It was a command, not a suggestion. Vivian's shoulders hunched. "Yes, of course," she murmured. I watched my daughter retreat, her head downcast in her own shop. Effie turned back to me with a smile as sharp as a razor. "I'm sure you understand, Mr. Adams. Vivian mentioned you." I spent 10 minutes going through the motions of an order I didn't need, watching Effie quote inflated prices while Vivian stood silently in the background. When I wrote the check for $2,300, Effie snatched it before Vivian could even reach for it. I walked out of that shop and drove to a coffee shop 2 blocks away, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. 40 years as a certified public accountant had taught me to recognize when numbers didn't add up, and nothing I had just seen made any sense. An hour later, I walked back and looked through the large front window from the side. My blood turned cold. A woman in her 60s, Beatrice, Brandon's mother, was standing in the center of the shop. She was jabbing her finger toward Vivian's face, her posture radiating dominance and control. Vivian was shaking, her head bowed as she sobbed. In the corner, a thin man sat at the computer, clicking through bank statements and ignoring my daughter's tears. It was Joachim, Brandon's brother. I had given my daughter this shop to heal. I had transferred the ownership, made it legally hers, and given her independence. Instead, I was watching her be destroyed in her own business while her late husband's family tallied the profits that belonged to her. I stepped back into the shadows before they could see me. My rage wasn't hot. It was ice cold and calculated. I had spent decades uncovering corporate fraud and bringing down executives who thought they were untouchable. I knew how to track money trails through shell companies and document evidence for court. These thieves didn't know who they were messing with. I waited in my car outside the service entrance until 9 in the evening. The front door opened, and Beatrice, Joachim, and Effie emerged laughing. They climbed into a silver Lexus that looked brand new A car worth $35,000 or $40,000 easily. They drove away, and 5 minutes later, Vivian exited through the back. She moved slowly, her body heavy with exhaustion. "Vivian," I called out. She spun around, her keys clutched like a weapon. "Dad, you can't be here," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Get in the car," I said. She hesitated, glancing around nervously before climbing in. I drove until we were miles away from the shop. "Tell me what is happening," I demanded. "Nothing. Everything is fine," she lied. "I saw her yelling at you," I countered. "I saw the bruise. I saw Effie treat you like hired help." Vivian broke. Deep, wrenching sobs shook her entire body. I pulled into a parking lot and waited for the storm to pass. "After Brandon died, I couldn't function," she finally said, her voice raw. "Beatrice showed up in January and said she wanted to help. She stayed after you gave me the house and the shop in February. She told me I shouldn't make big decisions while I was grieving. I remembered that February morning, signing over the deed to the house on Quimby Street, a property worth $685,000. I wanted her to have security. She convinced me to sign a power of attorney on February 18th, just in case I had a breakdown," Vivian whispered. It sounded reasonable at the time. The timeline clicked with sickening clarity in my mind. Beatrice had brought a notary to the house just 2 days after I'd given Vivian the shop. At first, it was small changes, but by March she insisted Vivian needed partners. She brought in Joachim and Effie and moved them into the house. By April, Beatrice made all the decisions. By May, they changed the locks on the office with the financial records. By June, Vivian's voice cracked, "I was just an employee. They pay me nothing. I work 12-hour days while Effie sits at the counter and Joachim transfers money for their personal use." When I objected, Beatrice told me I'd signed the paperwork and that she had the legal right to do whatever she wanted. "Joachim grabbed me yesterday when I asked to see the bank statements," she added, touching her bruised wrist. "He told me I needed to understand my place." My fury crystallized into perfect clarity. They were living in her house, using the master bedroom, and eating at expensive restaurants every night, spending $200 to $400 per meal. Beatrice had bought that Lexus the previous month for $38,500, all with money from the shop account. Before they took over, the shop averaged $8,400 in monthly net profit. Over 6 months, that was more than $50,000 burned through on cars and clothes, while my daughter worked for free. When Beatrice said to go to court, "What exactly did she say?" I asked. "She said I didn't have the money for a lawyer because everything goes through her now," Vivian said. I looked at my daughter and spoke quietly. "I don't actually need those flowers for an auction. What I need are the documents you signed, every single one of them." "Can you get them?" "Beatrice keeps them in the office filing cabinet," Vivian replied. "Get them," I told her. "Photograph every page with your phone and send them to me. I'm getting your business and your house back." Beatrice, Joachim, and Effie are about to understand that stealing from my daughter was their biggest mistake. For the next 14 days, I want you to go to work and pretend nothing has changed, I said. Let them think they've won. Vivian wiped her eyes, and I saw a flash of the strong woman she used to be. "Yes, I can do that," she said. I dropped her at her car and watched her drive back to the house that should have been her sanctuary. They assumed a retired old man would be easy to deceive. They thought paperwork equaled absolute power. But 4 decades in auditing taught me that paperwork can be destroyed just as easily as it is created. I pulled out my phone and started a list: private investigator, business attorney, notary, and a call to an old colleague at the IRS. The war hadn't even started yet. Friday morning, I sat in my garage workshop, the rhythmic sound of sandpaper against a wooden planter box helping me focus my thoughts. My phone buzzed with the photos Vivian had promised, power of attorney documents dated February 18th. Beatrice hadn't wasted a second. I made my first call to Quentin Brooks, a private investigator I'd used in the past. "I need surveillance on 3 individuals and deep financial background checks," I told him, discreet and thorough. Brooks didn't ask questions until I gave him the names and addresses. I told him my daughter's shop had been taken over, and I needed documentation of how they were spending her money. Business fraud, Brooks noted. It'll be $1,500 initial plus $200 daily, about a week to build a solid case. Worth it, I replied. I also needed their vulnerabilities, credit debt, liens, anything showing they were desperate. Next, I visited Elizabeth Morgan, the notary who had witnessed Vivian's signature. I showed her the photos of the documents. You notarized this on February 18th, I said. Do you remember it? She studied the document through her reading glasses. Yes, she said slowly. The young woman seemed very distressed, crying intermittently. The older woman kept reassuring her it was just a precaution. Did my daughter appear to understand what she was signing? I asked. Elizabeth paused. I noted in my records that she seemed uncertain about the terms. That's unusual for me to record. Would you provide a statement if subpoenaed? I pressed. Leverage was everything, and I was collecting it like gold coins. As I left her office, my phone rang. It was Quentin. Public records show Joachim Quinn has a judgment against him for $23,000 in credit card debt. A collection agency filed suit 3 months ago. That explained the desperation. They weren't just greedy, they were drowning. My final stop of the day was the law office of Alan Foster, a sharp-eyed specialist in business and property law. I laid out the entire situation on his desk. He read through the documents methodically. The power of attorney is legally valid, he said finally, but it is revocable at any time by your daughter, assuming she is mentally competent. She is competent, I said, just traumatized and exploited. Then we revoke it, Foster replied with a thin smile, but that won't recover the money already spent. For that, we have to prove a breach of fiduciary duty. Anyone holding power of attorney must act in the principal's best interest. If they haven't, they are personally liable for every dollar misappropriated. We need bank statements and documentation showing business funds were used for personal expenses, he added. I'm working on that, I assured him. Once you have proof, we demand a full accounting, Foster explained. If they refuse or provide fraudulent info, it strengthens our case. We can also file complaints with the Oregon Department of Revenue. That evening, Quentin called with the first results of the surveillance. Beatrice and Joachim had lunch at Clyde Common, $237. Effie was shopping at Pioneer Place and spent $4,200 at Michael Kors on the business account card. They spent $4,200 on handbags while Vivian worked unpaid, I muttered, my hands curling into fists. Keep watching, I told him. Document everything. He also confirmed the Lexus was purchased on July 15th for $30,500, financed through the shop's business credit line with zero down. They had leveraged Vivian's business credit for a luxury car. The arrogance was breathtaking. I sat in my workshop that night, watching the light fade. The planter box sat half-finished. I would sand it smooth tomorrow, making it perfect, just as I was perfecting my approach to destroying the Quinns. They had mistaken legal authority for invulnerability. They thought a piece of paper made them untouchable, but legal authority only works when the other side doesn't know the rules better than you do. I spent 40 years learning every loophole and every requirement. Beatrice Quinn wanted to play games with paperwork. She was about to find out what happens when a professional plays back. On Saturday morning, I called Vernon Hill, an old colleague who used to work for the IRS and was now a tax consultant. I explained the situation not as a father, but as someone who had discovered potential tax fraud. Running personal expenses through business accounts is textbook fraud, Vernon said, his voice sharpening. The IRS loves these cases. Provide the documentation and they'll investigate. At a minimum, an audit will cost them more in fees than they ever stole. Perfect, I said. I'll send you what I have. Quentin's reports continued to flood in. Sunday dinner at Le Pigeon cost $342. Monday, Effie spent $620 at a day spa. Tuesday, Joachim was at a sports bar repeatedly using the business card. Every transaction was photographed and documented. By Wednesday, I had everything I needed. I spent the evening organizing the evidence. The bank statements Vivian had photographed when Joachim left the office unlocked, Quentin's surveillance photos, and a timeline of the systematic takeover. The patterns were obvious. Amateur hour embezzlement that was insultingly easy to prosecute. I drafted the complaint to the Oregon Department of Revenue with cold clinical facts. No emotion, just numbers and violations. I submitted it anonymously online. 5 days later, on Friday morning, Vivian sent me a text that made me smile for the first time in weeks. Inspector at shop. Beatrice panicking. The first domino had fallen. That evening, Vivian called, and I could hear a shift in her voice. The inspector told them they need corrected records within 30 days or face a $15,000 penalty. Beatrice is losing it, blaming me for messing up the bookkeeping. What did you say? I asked. Nothing, just like you told me, she replied. But Dad, they are scared, really scared. Good, I said. Let them be scared. Don't react, don't defend yourself, just watch. I returned to my workshop and ran my hand over the finished planter box. It was smooth, solid, and perfect. Tomorrow I would deliver it to Vivian, a gift from a father to a daughter, but also a symbol of patience and precision. The Quinns would see a simple gesture, but they had no idea it represented the satisfaction of work done right. Alan Foster called me on Monday. The revocation documents were ready. Once Vivian signs, we notify the bank, the vendors, and everyone relying on Beatrice's authority. How quickly does it take effect? I asked. The moment she signs, Foster said. Beatrice's authority ends instantly. She won't be able to access accounts or make a single decision. Then we demand a full accounting. If she can't provide it, we sue for breach of fiduciary duty. I thought about Joachim's inevitable pathetic Excel spreadsheets. People clever enough to steal rarely think they'll have to defend themselves in court, so they get sloppy. When do we execute? I asked. Timing is everything, Foster advised. If they're already stressed about the tax audit, hitting them with the loss of authority will multiply the pressure. I agreed. One more week. I wanted them panicked about the taxes before I pulled the rug out from under them completely. The following week was a masterclass in pressure. Quentin's reports showed the Quinns scrambling. There were arguments outside the shop, and Effie was seen crying in her car. The expensive dinners stopped, and their spending slowed to a trickle. On Thursday evening, I delivered the planter box to Vivian as she was closing up. She ran her fingers over the smooth wood with tears in her eyes. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "It's for the front window," I told her. "Something I made for you." She looked at me with understanding. This wasn't just wood and nails. It was a promise that I was building something for her piece by piece. "Can you hold on for 2 more weeks?" I asked quietly. "Yes," she said, her voice stronger than before. I drove home as the sunset painted the Portland sky in shades of orange and pink. My phone buzzed with another report from Quentin. More documentation, more evidence, more nails in the coffin. The Quinns had gotten comfortable in their theft, but their world was about to collapse, and I was going to enjoy watching every second of it. On September 8th, I met Alan Foster in his office. He slid a formal request for financial accounting across the desk. Under Oregon law, a fiduciary must provide a full accounting upon request. The letter was professional, clinical, and devastating. It demanded a report of every dollar that had moved under Beatrice's authority for the last 6 months. What if she ignores it? I asked. The first letter is a request, Foster explained. If ignored, the second warns of legal consequences and the revocation of power. Most people panic at the second letter. I signed the authorization and sent it by courier. I wanted proof of delivery. Quentin's associate caught the delivery on camera. Beatrice signed for it, opened it at the counter, and then crumpled it up and threw it in the trash. It was exactly what I expected. 7 days later, on September 15th, the second letter arrived, thicker and more official. This time, Beatrice went pale. She called Joachim over, jabbing her finger at the paper while he shook his head wildly. Vivian called me that evening. "They are freaking out," she said. "Beatrice says the letter is illegal harassment, and Joachim has been locked in the office for hours." "Let them panic," I told her. "Don't react." 3 days later, on September 18th, Joachim's financial report finally arrived. I spread the pages across my kitchen table and laughed out loud. It was amateur hour. He'd sent a basic Excel spreadsheet with categories like marketing materials and operational costs. I saw the $4,200 listed as marketing on the exact day Effie bought those Michael Kors handbags. I saw the $304 for client entertainment when they ate at Le Pigeon. The Lexus was buried under transportation assets. Every personal expense was categorized as a business cost. There were no receipts, no logic, and the totals didn't even match the bank statements. I called Alan. "I have their report," I said. "It's a joke." "Send it over," he replied. "This is exactly what we need." Quentin met me at a coffee shop later that day with more findings. Joachim was in worse shape than we thought. He had 3 maxed-out credit cards and a total debt of around $37,000. His court date for the $23,000 judgment was October 22nd. I looked at the records. Effie was funding her entire lifestyle through the shop, spending $6,200 on personal purchases in the last week alone. He pulled out another document. The Lexus payment was due on October 1st for $1,400. If they can't access the account, they can't pay for the car, I noted. The pieces were falling into place with mathematical precision. They had built their lifestyle on Vivian's money, and now the foundation was cracking. Alan called me that weekend. "I've reviewed Joachim's report," he said. "It's textbook fraud. I can tear this apart in 5 minutes in front of a judge. Next, we demand a meeting to discuss the discrepancies, and when they can't explain them, we revoke the power." "How long until we act?" I asked. "1 more week," I decided. "Let them think they've satisfied the requirement, then we strike." That week crawled by. Quentin's reports showed the Quinns returning to their lavish spending, thinking they'd dodged a bullet. They didn't realize the bullet was still in the chamber. On September 25th, I picked up Vivian after she closed the shop. She looked tired but determined. "Are you ready?" I asked. She nodded. "What do I need to do?" "Tomorrow, in Alan's office, you sign 1 document," I told her. "Then we watch their world collapse." "I'm scared," she admitted, staring at the Portland lights. "What if they fight back?" "They will," I said, "and that's when we hit them harder. We have the law, the evidence, and the truth. They have lies and stolen money. This isn't a fair fight, Vivian. It's a slaughter." She gave me a small, genuine smile. "When did you become so ruthless?" "I'm not ruthless," I replied. "I'm just very, very patient." At 9 a.m. on September 26th, we sat in Alan Foster's office. Vivian signed the revocation of power of attorney, her pen moving smoothly across the paper. With that signature, Beatrice Quinn's legal authority evaporated. "I'll file this morning," Alan said. "Certified copies go to the bank, the vendors, and Beatrice. By noon, her access to the accounts terminates." We drove to the shop. I had hired Marcus, a former military man standing 6'3", to provide security. He was already stationed outside. 3 people are going to show up angry," I told him. "Don't let them near Vivian." Vivian unlocked her shop and walked through the door as the actual owner for the first time in months. We changed the office locks and all the passwords. "It feels strange," she said quietly. "Like I'm taking back something that was always mine." "You didn't forget it was yours," I told her. "They just made you forget." At 3 p.m., Vivian's phone rang. The bank had just called Beatrice. I could hear her screaming through the phone. "Don't answer it," I advised. A voicemail followed. "Yeah. Vivian, what have you done? The bank says I can't access the account. This is illegal." 20 minutes later, Quentin sent a video. The Quinn's silver Lexus pulled up, and all 3 of them piled out. Beatrice was red-faced, Joachim looked murderous, and Effie was already crying. They rushed the door, but Marcus stepped in front of them. I couldn't hear the exchange, but the body language was clear. Beatrice was jabbing her finger at Marcus, but he just shook his head. When Joachim tried to push past, Marcus put a flat palm against his chest and stopped him cold. Alan Foster arrived right on time, carrying a leather folder. He walked up to the group with professional neutrality. I followed him inside, as Marcus let the Quinns in under supervision. They stood in the middle of the flower shop like invaders. Beatrice saw me and her eyes narrowed. "You!" she spat. "You put her up to this." "I simply explained to my daughter that she has rights," I replied calmly. Alan opened his folder. "Mrs. Quinn, as of 9 a.m., the power of attorney has been formally revoked." Under Oregon law, the principal has the absolute right to revoke such authorization. The revocation is legal and final. Beatrice's face went from red to white to a blotchy purple. This is illegal. I have rights. We have a contract. You had a power of attorney, which is conditional authorization, Alan corrected her. It has been revoked. You no longer have any authority over Miss Adams-Quinn's business or finances. Joachim stepped forward, his hands clenched. You can't just kick us out. You were managing under authority that no longer exists, Alan said. As of now, you are trespassing. Miss Adams-Quinn is offering you the courtesy of leaving voluntarily. If you refuse, she'll call the police. Effie's voice was shrill. This is insane. We gave up everything to help her. From what I've seen, Vivian did the work while you three spent the profits. I cut in. You abandoned Vivian. Beatrice's voice shook. You gave her this shop and disappeared. We were here. I gave her this shop and house as gifts, not as payment for your services, I told her. You exploited her grief, manipulated her, and stole from her for 6 months. That ends today. Vivian stepped forward, her voice steady. You need to leave now. Beatrice's face crumpled with rage. We'll sue. We'll take everything. Actually, Alan said, pulling out another page, you should be more concerned about this formal demand for financial accounting. We've reviewed Mr. Quinn's report. It is inadequate and contains fraudulent categorizations. You have 45 days to provide accurate accounting and return the misappropriated funds, or we file a civil lawsuit for breach of fiduciary duty. Joachim's face went gray. How much? He stammered. Preliminary estimates suggest approximately $47,300 in unauthorized personal expenditures, Alan stated. Effie made a sound like a wounded animal. $47,300? You bought a Lexus on the business credit line for $38,500, I reminded them, plus Michael Kors bags, dinners, and spa treatments. It adds up fast. Beatrice looked at me with pure calculation, trying to find an angle, but she found nothing. We'll fight this, she said, though her voice was uncertain. We have 6 months of bank records, surveillance photos, and your son's fraudulent report, I said. We have everything. They left, Beatrice leading the way with her shoulders rigid. Joachim followed, gray-faced, and Effie was crying openly as her Instagram-perfect life collapsed around her. Silence filled the shop. They are really gone from here, Vivian exhaled. They're still in your house, I noted, but not for long. I put my hand on her shoulder. You did it. We did it, she corrected, and then she smiled. The first real smile since Brandon died. On September 30th, Alan sent the notice to terminate their tenancy via certified mail. Under Oregon law, they were guests who had overstayed their welcome. There was no lease and no rent payments, which meant they had no legal right to stay in Vivian's house. They had 30 days to leave. I expected resistance, and Beatrice didn't disappoint. On October 1st, Vivian's phone rang while we were at the shop reorganizing the office. It's Beatrice, Vivian said, showing me the screen. Put it on speaker, I told her. Vivian! Beatrice's voice dripped with wounded dignity. I just received a horrible letter from your lawyer. Eviction. How could you do this to me? It's my house. Beatrice, you need to leave, Vivian said, her voice stronger than I expected. This was Brandon's house, my son's house. You're throwing your dead husband's mother into the street. Have you no shame? Vivian's hand trembled, so I put my hand over hers to steady it. Brandon is gone, Vivian said. The house is mine. Dad gave it to me. You have 30 days. We'll fight this, Beatrice screamed. We have rights. I leaned toward the phone. Actually, Beatrice, you don't. Oregon law is clear. Without a written lease or rent payments, you are guests, and guests can be asked to leave at any time. There was silence on the line before Beatrice's voice turned poisonous. Frank, this is all you're doing, isn't it? You're destroying this family. I'm protecting my daughter from people who have been stealing from her for 6 months, I replied. There's a big difference. She hung up so hard the phone made a sharp sound through the speaker. 3 days later, Alan told me Beatrice had hired Donald Mercer, a bottom-tier estate lawyer. He'll charge her $200 an hour to tell her she has implied tenancy, but it won't work. Oregon courts require written leases. He'll just drag it out and bill her while a judge eventually rules for us. The Quinns were buying time, hoping we'd negotiate, but they didn't realize their leverage had evaporated. On October 7th, they still hadn't moved a single box, so it was time for the next move. I hired Mark Sullivan, a property assessor, to meet me at the house while the Quinns were out meeting with their lawyer. Mark walked through the house methodically with his camera. The master bedroom looked like a hotel room after a rock band had stayed there. There were stains on the carpet and burns on the dresser where someone had set down hot items. The bathroom mirror was cracked. Master bedroom carpet needs replacing. $1,800, Mark noted. Dresser is damaged, $900. Mirror, $300. In the living room, there were dark red wine stains on Vivian's cream sofa and coffee rings on the antique end tables she'd inherited from her grandmother. Sofa cleaning or replacement, $200. End tables, $800. The kitchen was even worse, with grease splattered on the walls, a broken cabinet handle, and scorch marks on the granite counter. By the time Mark finished, the total damage was $8,700. Alan filed a civil claim for property damage that evening. The Quinns didn't just need to leave. They now owed Vivian money for what they had destroyed. If they refused to pay, we'd garnish their assets, the Lexus, the designer bags, whatever was left. On October 10th, Joachim showed up at the shop pacing outside like a caged animal. Marcus stood firmly at the door. Vivian called me, her voice tight with stress. I arrived in 15 minutes. Joachim's face darkened when he saw me. "This is between me and Vivian," he snapped. "Everything involving my daughter is between you and me now," I said. "You've poisoned her against us," he yelled. "We helped her." "You stole from her," I countered. Joachim's hands clenched into fists, and Marcus stepped forward slightly as a reminder of his presence. Joachim backed up half a step. "We just want to work something out," he pleaded. "This is family business." "Family doesn't steal," I told him. "Family doesn't leave bruises." I pulled out my phone and showed him the photo of the bruise on Vivian's wrist. "I have this, and I have surveillance footage of you physically grabbing her arm. I have recordings of you threatening her. If you come near her again, I'm filing criminal harassment charges." Joachim went pale. "We have nowhere to go," he said, his voice dropping. "No money, no place to stay." "That's not Vivian's problem," I said. "You spent every dollar she earned for 6 months on Lexuses and handbags instead of saving for your own place. You have until October 30th. After that, the sheriff will escort you out." "Mom is going to fight this," he threatened. "Let her," I said. "Every day she fights costs her more in legal fees she can't afford." Donald Mercer's billing meter is running constantly. His jaw tightened. It was a direct hit. He stood there for a long moment, deflated, then turned and walked back to his car. "That was cold," Marcus observed. "That was necessary," I replied. Inside the shop, Vivian was shaking. "I've never seen you like that," she said. "Like you'd actually hurt him." "I wouldn't have hurt him physically," I said, "but I would have made sure he understood the consequences." She hugged me tightly. "Thank you for being scary for me," she whispered. I smiled. I spent 40 years making nervous executives sweat in boardrooms. This is the exact same skill set. The pieces were falling into place exactly where I'd carefully put them. The Quinns were cornered. The second half of October turned into a frantic retreat for the Quinns. On October 13th, I met with Patricia Chambers, a forensic accountant who had assisted me on some of my toughest corporate fraud cases. She was a professional who found discrepancies in a spreadsheet like they were glaring typos. I handed her the bank records Vivian had managed to photograph and the laughable Excel report Joachim had submitted. Patricia scanned the pages and let out a short, sharp laugh of disbelief. She promised a full report within a week. When it arrived via encrypted email 3 days later, the reality was even uglier than I had imagined. The total misappropriated amount was exactly $47,300. The breakdown was a map of their greed. $8,400 on personal dining, $3,500 for the luxury car, $4,200 for handbags, and thousands more on spas and cash withdrawals. Every lie in Joachim's report was now highlighted with cold, hard bank proof. Alan prepared the formal demand letter immediately. Pay $47,300 in full within 45 days, or face a lawsuit for breach of fiduciary duty and potential embezzlement charges. The letter hit their lawyer's office on October 12th. That evening, Beatrice called Vivian while we were at the house, which was finally ours again after the sheriff's notice had forced them to clear out most of their junk. Vivian put the phone on speaker. "Vivian, please." Beatrice's voice trembled dramatically. "We desperately need to talk about this horrible demand letter." "There is nothing to talk about, Beatrice," Vivian said. "You took $47,300 that wasn't yours, and you need to return it." "I don't have that kind of money. We spent it all," Beatrice wailed. "We thought we were properly managing the business. You thought you were stealing from me while I grieved," Vivian countered. "I'm Brandon's mother." "I was grieving too," Beatrice shrieked. "I only wanted to help you." "You wanted to help yourself to my money," Vivian said, her voice turning to pure ice. "You told me in June that if I didn't like it, I should take you to court because I couldn't afford a lawyer. Well, I found an excellent one, and now you're the one who can't afford the fight." The Wounded Mother Act died instantly. Beatrice's tone shifted into something ugly and venomous. "You're making a mistake. Brandon would be ashamed of how you're treating his mother." "Brandon loved me," Vivian said. "You're not my family anymore, Beatrice. You lost that right when you bruised my wrist and locked me out of my own office. I'll tell everyone what you've done," Beatrice threatened. "Everyone will know you threw your mother-in-law into the street." "Please do," Vivian invited her. "I have 6 months of bank records, a forensic audit, and your son's fraudulent report. I'd love for people to know what you really are." Beatrice hung up without another word. Vivian sat down heavily on the sofa. "Did I really just say all that?" she asked. "You just won," I told her. On October 15th, their lawyer filed a desperate response. It was 30 pages of fluff arguing that the misuse of funds was an unintentional misunderstanding rather than fraud. Alan called me, sounding amused. "They're throwing everything at the wall hoping it sticks, but intent doesn't matter in fiduciary duty cases. They had obligations and they failed them." We filed for summary judgment with the forensic report and the fraudulent accounting. There was no factual dispute possible. The judge would rule in our favor without a full trial. The Quinns were finished, and they knew it. But Beatrice had one last card to play: public humiliation. On October 18th, Beatrice took her grievances to Facebook. She posted a long, tearful narrative about how she had moved to Portland to support her beloved son's widow, only to be cruelly thrown into the street and falsely accused of theft. The comments were vicious. Strangers who didn't know the story called Vivian heartless, ungrateful, and cruel. I watched Vivian's confidence crack as she read the words. "Don't read them," I told her. "We are going to handle this by telling the truth to the people who actually matter." I spent 2 days making calls. On October 20th, 15 people gathered in the shop. Vivian's loyal customers, her rose suppliers, the baker from next door, and the coffee shop owner from across the street. I projected the forensic report and the bank statements onto the wall. While my daughter worked 12-hour days without pay, the Quinn family spent over $47,000 of her money on a Lexus, Michael Kors bags, and luxury dinners, I told the room. I showed them the photo of the bruise on Vivian's wrist. I knew something was wrong. Phyllis Miller, a regular customer, said. Vivian used to smile. Then she just looked scared. The truth spread like wildfire. Within 3 days, the narrative on Beatrice's post flipped completely. People who actually knew the situation started commenting with the facts. Gary Thornton, our rose supplier, posted about how Beatrice had tried to bully him for discounts. Monica Chen from the coffee shop mentioned seeing Effie brag on Instagram while Vivian worked in dirty clothes. Beatrice tried to delete the post, but it was too late. Screenshots were everywhere. On October 26th, the door to my workshop opened. It was Beatrice. The Lexus was gone, repossessed. Her hair needed dyeing, her polish was gone, and her expensive clothes were replaced by old worn pieces. "Frank, please," she said, her voice cracking. "I can get $10,000, maybe $12,000. My sister might lend it to me. Tell Vivian to accept a payment plan." "No," I said, not stopping my sanding. "I'm Brandon's mother." "Doesn't that mean anything?" she begged. "It means you should have known better," I replied, looking her in the eye. "You forgot that I spent decades finding people who lie for a living. You underestimated the auditor." "I made mistakes," she whispered. "Theft isn't a mistake, Beatrice," I said. "Alan files the lawsuit tomorrow. See you in court." The hearing on November 2nd lasted only 90 minutes. Vivian and I didn't even attend. We let the evidence speak for itself. Alan called me afterward with the news. A total victory. The judge had reviewed the forensic report and the fraudulent accounting. When he asked the Quinns if they disputed any facts, they couldn't answer. Beatrice tried to claim emotional distress, but the judge shut her down, stating that fiduciary duty doesn't have an emotional exemption. The judgment was for $47,300 plus $5,400 in court costs, totaling $50,700 due within 90 days. If they didn't pay, we could seize everything they had left: jewelry, bank accounts, anything. The judge also granted a restraining order. None of them could come within 100 feet of Vivian or the shop. By mid-November, Vivian's Blooms was alive again. 2 new employees, Sarah and Miguel, worked the counter while Vivian actually managed the business instead of just surviving. Revenue was on track for $9,200 for the month. I was at the shop when we saw Beatrice walk past on the sidewalk. She didn't look in. Her coat was old, her head was down, and she was heading toward the bus stop. "Her Lexus was auctioned last week for $32,000, Vivian said quietly. "She still owes over $20,000. "Justice isn't about feeling good," I told her. "It's about balance." On November 20th, we attended the enforcement hearing because Beatrice had missed the first payment deadline. She stood before the judge alone, looking 10 years older than she had in August. "I don't have the money," she told the judge. "I'm living with my sister." The judge didn't blink. He signed the asset seizure approval. The sheriff would inventory and auction all her non-exempt property, including her jewelry. "This is cruel," she whispered, looking at us in the back row. "I'm Brandon's mother." "You were stealing," the judge said flatly. 48 hours to provide an asset list. Dismissed. As she shuffled out, Alan told us the judgment would follow her forever. Garnished wages, tax refunds, seizures. She would never be free of the debt she created. By December 15th, the shop was decorated for the holidays, and the rhythm of success was steady. I delivered one last planter box, a large ornate cherrywood piece for the front entrance. Vivian led me into her office, the one she had been locked out of for so long. On the wall was the framed deed to the shop with her name in bold letters. "I'm changing the business structure," she told me. "Sarah and Miguel will become partial owners after a year. I want people invested in our success." "You're a real business owner now," I said, smiling. We looked out the window and saw Beatrice walking past on the opposite sidewalk. It was the 3rd time that week. She always looked over, but she never stopped. She had no choice but to walk past the life she had tried to steal. Quentin sent his final bill later that day. He said it was the most satisfying case he had worked in 5 years. As I drove home through the holiday lights, I realized the story was finally over. The theft had been exposed, the criminals had faced their consequences, and the victim had become the victor. I had given my daughter a flower shop. She had lost it to thieves, and together, we had taken it back. That was more than enough. If this story resonated with you, leave a like and consider subscribing. You can also drop any comment below, even just one word. Maybe tell me where you're watching from, or what time it is right now. Sometimes one word is enough to say you were here.